Alright, hit the button, making a video. So I think this will be a context video. I'm going to try to index the videos on vloggerdomes with keywords of some kind. It's a concept I tried in the past and it sort of failed, but it doesn't matter. Even if my own videos, no one's getting indexed, it's okay. So for the context videos, which are basically a junk drawer category, yeah, they'll all go in the DNG context, one word. So if you put that in the tags, whenever I create an indexer, it'll pick up those videos if they're relevant. So anyway, this is sort of a response to the modern mystic, but more a discussion of Nietzsche. Yeah, that's where it's going to start anyway. But it's this whole perspective thing. How do you gain perspective on what it is that we are doing? What's the relevant facts? And how do those facts change if you change some sort of context, or some incapable of being eviscerated by some kind of perspective? What's the real perspective? So the modern mystic is sort of playing with levels of perspective, and I can't concede that as being reasonable just because those levels are myopic. They exclude information. So if, for example, this universe was like the Horton Hears a Who universe, let's say there was we on this planet were participants at this level, and there was a bigger universe out there, like we're just the toe on an elephant in some other universe. Unfortunately, yeah, the Horton Hears a Who thing doesn't really happen because the distance between whatever that reality is and whatever we are is so fantastically huge that there would be no capacity to build the talkie phone thing. You're never going to do that. That ain't going to happen. So it's a nice little pretend, but it isn't anything to do with reality. So again, that's out of the real perspective, and in the fantasy perspective, oh, I wish, but it's not true. So anyway, from our perspective, right, we can't see or in any way realize the elephant's welfare. We have no knowledge of it in this level of our world. It means nothing. It is not relevant. It's not visible. It's not tangible. It's not accessible. But that doesn't negate its existence. Its existence is still real. We just don't have any connection to it. We're too distant from it. And so I see little productivity in saying that as I reduce the universe into its smaller parts, that somehow I'm being fair to what its more complex arrangement means. The fact that I can be a tire on a car and be a piece of rubber in the tire and be inside the tire and not have much participation with the car doesn't mean the car doesn't exist. It just means I'm not connected to it personally. So I just don't, it's just not being, it's being real to recognize the fact of these levels of construction. The fact that we are made of parts is reasonable, but to isolate reality to the function of those parts is not reasonable. That's negating. It's like saying diamonds are just made out of carbon. It's just not true in the sense that if that's all you're going to say, you have to account for the arrangement of the carbon, because the arrangement has an implication. It creates properties. There's a reality to arrangement. And so as again this argument is going to be is, if you just say that pixels are the only thing that exist on a screen, the little dots of light, and all you look at is the dots of light, and you never consider the arrangement of the dots, you're negating an awful lot of information. You're negating an awful lot of reality, because there's a lot of reality built into arrangement. Arrangement creates properties. There's a difference between graphite and a diamond, and all it is arrangement. And so arrangement is significant. It's not insignificant. So, yeah, just the whole idea of attempting to isolate reality to a level and say there's a more legitimate or original level, that's just not correct. Yeah, there's one, the whole thing is the whole thing. Breaking it into pieces is good for understanding how it works, but it isn't good for defining what it means, or what's happening, or what its whole is. So, yeah, I just sort of quite foul on that one. Anyway, so let's get back to Nietzsche. All right, so we just keep arguing this what he said, and what he said is veiled in so much poetry, incredibly articulate, but it is just a bunch of unconnected statements, and they're not terribly useful. And what you can find emphasis here and there. You can find some emphatic statements, statements that are just pretty unmutable. You can't change them into something else. He's pretty much saying something explicitly, but they are hidden in piles and piles and piles of conversation about how flat somebody's feet are, and so they're going to get lost. In the end, he's presumed purpose from the biology, the organic, the natural, and just that is the premise. You just have to accept it. That's his premise. His premise is that there's nothing else that I can find that says anything, that means anything. The structures of religious fantasy and Gardens of Eden is nonsense. There is just this mechanics of evolution, and he's bought into that. He's basically a Darwinist in the worst sense of that word. I mean, in the worst use of that word. He's pretty much a racist and an elitist and a somebody who believes that there is somewhere to progress to, that human beings will become some kind of superhuman, that there's some kind of way to do that that's meaningful, and that there's an end. We're not just chasing a tail, we're actually chasing something more than a tail, is the implications of what he's willing to accept for that progress, quote unquote. So I would argue that he pretty much explicitly states that exploitation is the nature of nature, that's what successful organisms do, and they do it calculatedly, just perfectly, completely. They own everything. All right, so this is this will to power thing. It's will to own, will to control, will to possess, will to use, and that somehow any means is a justification if the end is improvement or progress. So by his logic, slavery was worth it, okay, because we gained industrial progress. It's a shortcut that's acceptable. You can just totally annihilate the value of somebody else's existence if it's going to further your existence. It's a sensibly and reasonably bankrupt perception of value. He puts no value on suffering, and he puts some kind of value, apparently, at least more than he puts on suffering, for the silly triumph of sticking your flag in the ground and saying, I invented Kool-Aid. Yeah. He thinks that's worth a billion dead people. Yes, because you got Kool-Aid out of it. There would be no means he wouldn't say is a justification, because this is somehow a step forward. So as long as one man moves forward, it doesn't matter how many turn into blood. So it just doesn't have any continuity to any kind of realistic perception that this is a real game with real stakes, real welfares involved, and just doesn't occur to him to think that matters, because it doesn't matter to evolution. It doesn't matter to Mother Nature, and therefore it shouldn't matter to us. He uses phrases in his work, a mixing of blood. I think he thinks he's going to breed an Oberman. I don't think he I don't think he understands completely that perception doesn't require, the difference is you don't need to have 150 IQ to be able to understand there's no God, right? I mean, logically. You don't need extraordinary capabilities to be an extraordinary person, to be well formed in terms of your character and your sensitivities and sensibilities. It doesn't take a great deal of intelligence to be well formed. But what it does take is, yes, you have to become immune to getting caught up in all kinds of silly games. You have to be immune to the clutter and the noise, the distractions, I guess you could argue. You don't need to be highly, highly capable to be able to absorb the relevant information. But the fact is there's so much irrelevant clouding it, and I'd say he contributes to that problem, makes a lot of noise talking about the fact that people's socks don't match their tie. That yes, you get lost in the bullshit, the nonsense, the mush, and the real valuable information is not possessed because there's only so much room in brains to hold so much nonsense. Yeah, pretty much. So, but the point is we don't need to breed better humans. We need to maturate better humans. And it really is just programming, right? To some extent, and understanding, having some sort of realization of the circumstance you're in. And most of us, I would argue, are maturated in confusion. Horrible mixed messages. And most of them just absolutely nonsensical. We're raised in a morality of God or a good and evil kind of hell and heavenish kind of nonsense that doesn't get to the core, that doesn't sensibly recognize what is valuable about a human being. Is the fact that they can be harmed. I mean, just something that simple, a simple statement like that, you're not raised with. There's no mass media images, there's no cartoons, there's no nothing that just makes this simple statement. Okay, what makes you valuable is the fact that you can feel pain, that you can be hurt, and being hurt isn't fun. It's not a good thing, it's a bad thing. And just as it's no good for you to be hurt, it's no good for somebody else to be hurt. It's no good for anything to be hurt. But they can't say that at the same time they're running TV commercials about what kind of sauce you should put on your dead cow, or your chicken, or whatever else you're consuming, the sensitive creature you've exploited and destroyed for your gratification. So, I mean, obviously those messages wouldn't be compatible, so they don't exist, because the more important message is the getting what we want, and doing it ethically isn't the more important question. So we're not raised on that. And certainly you couldn't be raised on it by people who had acquired that sensibility in the first place, because the act of procreation is so bold and so aggressive that the people likely to commit it aren't going to be very sensitive. And that's just the truth. They're not going to be apprehensive and scared and worried about implications. They're reckless sorts and arrogant sorts and defiant sorts. They're not going to be slowed down by some notion of a risk or danger or imposition, an important concept. Imposition doesn't really going to occur to them. They're not going to be indoctrinating their spawn in some lecture about the dangers of imposition, because it's an act they've completely embraced. They've embraced their right to it. It's some sort of native right to play God, to initiate, to create the potential for, and to completely abdicate responsibility, as if they didn't roll the dice, as if they didn't lose the money, the mortgage payment, at the gambling house. They'll just say everybody else is doing it. That was the extent of the brilliance that maturates most human beings. It's not very brilliant. And so the point is, though, is that yes, for the person of high character, the person of high wisdom and understanding, is going to have to overcome their maturation, their parents. They're going to have to overcome the liabilities of their parents and their society, the noise and the nonsense they will attempt to infect them with, the virus of bullshit they will try to corrupt their logic with conflicting messages that are okay. It's okay to say things that are completely duplicitous and contradictory, because that's how society works. Since it's more important how society works and how human beings progress than it is the welfare of the slaves, essentially. I mean, we're back to that argument that it's okay, the victims are an acceptable price, and all we're about is some sort of march in that direction because the DNA molecule says so. No examination of whether those ends can be justified. It's not about the fact that our means, our choice of means, are despicable in terms of the huge waste of it all, who we choose to be the victims, how we negate their reality, how we dismiss the harm. The secondary crime is that it's for a glory that is so trivial, that is just made up. It's just a grotesquely silly notion of self-aggrandizement, self-satisfaction. We know these ambitions are corrupt. We know there, you could have some feeling like, I would like to have a Lamborghini, but you do know inside your psychology that's really not going to make you happy. As much as you think it will, it won't. It'll be a horrible liability. It'll cost you a fortune. You won't be able to drive it anywhere. It'll just make a lot of noise. It'll be fun for 5 minutes, and then it's just going to wear off. And then it's just going to be something you have to keep clean, and you have to worry about breaking down and all this other nonsense. And you're not going to get any benefit out of it in the end. And that's the same with this accomplishment of the plan, just playing the game for the sake that it's a game and something threw you in it, so you're just going to play it. It seems obvious that something called a reasonably intelligent human being should analyze the game they're playing. That should be something that occurs to them. And even if the society says nothing about it pretty much says the opposite. Don't look at the game. Don't look behind the curtain. Don't make the God disappear. It just seems that, if you have any logical continuity, if there's any function at all to your logic, that it just seems that you would, in your own interest, in your own will to know, that you would have to sit there and examine some part of it. And once you start picking at it, it seems that you would find it amazing that everything you picked at turned into a facade, into a piece of cardboard, that there was, like, every single thing in this reality, that if you start picking at it, it does turn to crap. And that should give you an indication that maybe it's all crap, and that the more you walk around and the more you expose yourself to these other levels of existence, these other levels of perspective, that you realize that there's that you can't justify any price, because there really isn't anything to be accomplished. It's just the gratification of a mechanism of compulsion, a mechanism that says you will eat. While you're alive, you're going to eat, you're going to breathe, you're going to do this stuff, or you're going to pay a price for not doing it. And because it imposes this economy on you, you just assume that that's all there is. That maintaining this is all there is. And it isn't the accurate context. You can't maintain your is free, independent of all the other is that's out there. And you will be made vulnerable by those ises also. The recognition that you didn't get here through your volition, you got here through someone else's volition. So if you embrace the volitions of others, you're basically embracing you next time, being the slave instead of the master. That's part of Nietzsche's thing, in the end of Beyond Good and Evil, is just opposing, master and slave morality, master and slave perspective. And basically he just critiques both, though. There's nothing valuable in this perception that that there is some value in the high-mindedness of the aristocrats when they're on their best behavior and feeling their best obligation to their power, which they seldom do, nor is there value in looking at the slave's desperation to in many ways just acquire the same control and power, not to really gain freedom from their slavery or their encumbrance, but to in fact have the will to be just the other guy, the will to be still fighting the fight and just become the villain instead of the victim, and not understand the context of the relationship between the villain and the victim. So neither morality is the morality. Accurate morality is to understand the mechanism, the fact that the fight, the conflict, had that there's no victory in causing something else's defeat. It's just a simple logic. You winning, recognizing the fact that now somebody else will not win, defeats your victory. It pulls the rug out from under it if you're going to apply logic. There's no point in winning if somebody else has to lose. And there's no contest in reality to have that won't create a loser. It's not the mechanism of nature. Nature doesn't play with something of real value. It just plays a thieving game, a game where things steal from each other, where one thing preys upon another. And so we're back to the exploitation, that is the game, but it's not a game worth playing. It's the simple conclusion. It's the Schopenhauer conclusion that Nietzsche wishes to find a way to escape, but his way to escape it is to ignore it, to ignore the implications, to ignore the fact that there is no victory in creating defeat. That you can't have it. There's no gain worth any pain. It just isn't. The gain is an illusion, a delusion, and the only thing that is real is the negative of the suffering. So again, I'll finish with just re-emphasizing my metaphor, that if there were two things to do, to give a neutral thing happiness, or to give a suffering thing neutrality, you would logically be compelled to go first to the suffering, because the notion of a good time isn't a well-constructed concept. It isn't. It doesn't have any correlation to reality. You don't need a good time. You need not to have a bad time, and that's a truth. So anyway, enough of video. There, I made it before the camera ran out. I thought I'd drone on, but that's probably enough for a context video. But it is frustrating because this is all it doesn't seem that complicated. I mean, you just migrate through this process of once you realize, okay, I'm caught up in a system. Let's find the boundaries of the system I'm caught up in, and let's find what the value is that's being exchanged, and let's discuss what these values are worth, what these things that we're chasing are worth. And it just seems that this deconstruction is just so obvious that, you know, the mechanism of the origins, the rules of the game dictated by nature are crude and stupid. They won't produce victory. They'll produce a kind of failure. And unfortunately, when you analyze it, you figure out that, but there is no game. Okay, it is tic-tac-toe simple. The board is made out of too few parts. The universe is made out of too few parts. And there's no way for you to construct something that can be put into the universe that can be intrinsically and fundamentally good. Because, tragically, the idea of good can only exist if there's a bad to correct or prevent. It's the mechanism. It's just the way the universe is made. You can't. It doesn't intrinsically need, and so you have to contrive the need. You have to build the need, and building need is nonsensical. There you have it. Such.